Hey guys, welcome back to another doll customizing video. In today's video, I will not be customizing a Monster High or an Ever After High doll. Today, I will actually be customizing a Pinkie Cooper doll. These dolls have actually stopped being manufactured, but when I first got into doll customizing, I did buy quite a few of these. I really like their face molds because they're meant to look like dogs, and the fact that they had inset eyes really drew me to want to customize one of these dolls. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. As you read from the title, I will be turning this doll into a panda bear, but I want to quickly say that I actually did start this doll quite a while ago, I just never got a chance to finish her. I actually started this doll before I even started making videos on YouTube, so that just shows you how long she's been sitting in my stock box, and really all I did to her was wipe off her factory face and paint this kind of panda shape around her eyes. I wasn't really happy with how I had painted her nose or the blush around her mouth, so that's why I'm wiping it off right now with my acetone, and I'm going to start again. Before I even tried customizing this Pinkie Cooper doll into a panda bear doll, I actually had customized another Pinkie Cooper doll into a bunny. This bunny doll was actually my first attempt at trying to do inset eyes by resin mold, so it was quite an experience. While I was customizing that bunny doll, I actually learned that acetone doesn't really affect the plastic on this doll, which is why I used it to remove the blushing on her legs and her arms in this video. After that, I sprayed her body with one layer of MSC and I tried to blush her body with some black pastels, and as you can see it just really didn't stick, so I ended up going with plan B and just painting her legs with some black acrylic paint. This doll was definitely a learning experience, so if some of my techniques seem a little weird or a little off, that is probably why. I wasn't really sure how to even customize this doll, so some of these techniques I might use in the future and some of them I might not. Like this one, I probably won't be using acrylic paint to body blush a doll in the future. Even though she is a doll, I still wanted her to look like a real panda, so that is why I used the black acrylic paint on the bottom half of her legs, all of her arms, and across the center of her chest. In order to make the transition from black to white a little bit more seamless, I used a dry brush with a little bit of black paint to create fur-like marks. After spraying her face with one layer of Mr. Super Clear, I reblushed her forehead, nose, and a little bit on her lips. Even though I said I wanted her to look like a real panda, I still ended up going a little heavy on the blush. With a very sharp black watercolor pencil, I slowly start outlining the shape of her nose. Drawing a nose on this doll's face mold was actually a bit more difficult than I thought, because on a Monster High or Ever After High doll, their nose is pretty flat compared to this doll's nose, so it was kind of difficult to get an even look. I kept her bottom lip pretty simple, I just blushed it, but later on I do use some watercolor pencils to make it a little bit more darker. I tried to use my black pencil to draw the line from her nose to the bottom part of her lip, but my pencil was a little bit too thick to reach the crevices in her mouth, so I had to switch to use a black watercolor pencil and a wet brush. I think I mentioned this in my last video, which was the Dark Unicorn doll, that I have been trying the new technique of a watercolor pencil with a wet brush. My next repaint video will primarily be that type of technique. I did start off with my regular watercolor pencils, but in order to get the deep colors that I wanted for the doll, I did use the watercolor pencil with the wet brush technique a lot more than I normally do. The next thing I'm doing here is adding a little bit of blush towards the inner corner of her eyes. Using a black pencil or even black paint on a doll is already difficult enough, so trying to paint these tiny little lines in this panda bear's mouth was pretty difficult. It's not impossible, but it does take a very steady hand and a lot of patience. At this point, her bottom lip looked a little bit too big in comparison to her whole mouth, so I decided to use that black watercolor pencil and carry it down onto her bottom lip in order to make it look smaller and a little bit thinner. I also tried adding a few highlights using a pink watercolor pencil, but since they came out a little big with the brush, I used my red pencil in order to make them a little bit thinner. The black paint on her body actually seemed to hold up pretty well. The only problem was chipping around her joints, so in order to fix that, I just used a black Sharpie to fill them in. Since I would be moving her arms around a lot in pictures, I decided to spray her arms with one layer of MSC. Moving on to the eyes, I decided to use the original Pinkie Cooper eyes, and for this I simply took them apart since they are two pieces, and I removed the eyelashes from them. With a little bit of acetone and a light touch, I removed some of the paint that was on her eye because I didn't want it to be visible when I repainted the new color. The main thing that I didn't want visible from the original Pinkie Cooper eye chip was the blushing around the inner corner of her eye and the really heavy eyeliner. Since this is a springtime doll, I thought that green would be a very nice eye color for this panda bear. I also used a black paint for her eye, but for now I get started by painting a green circle onto the eye chip. My first Pinkie Cooper doll that I turned into a bunny, I actually gave her resin eye molds from a mold that I had, and they actually fit the doll a little bit weird because it didn't fit the eye mold properly, so that's why I really wanted to use these inset eyes that the Pinkie Cooper doll already had. After getting a solid layer of green paint, I painted a black circle in the middle of the eye. It is much easier to paint these eye chips than it is to paint on a regular Monster High doll, so it's really easy to get a lot of detail. So for this, I used a light green paint in order to give her a bottom highlight. After this, I used a mix of the dark green and the light green paint in order to make a gradient, but as you can see, I went off camera, so it was kind of hard to see that process. And the next thing I did after that was use some black pastels in order to give a bit of a shadow from that black to green. I also outlined the pupil with a very thin line of black paint. I found that color shift paint works well when you have a similar color underneath it, so after all of the other steps have been done, I finally use that paint and go over the green section. I really like this paint because it adds a little bit more glitter and shine to the eye before adding the actual white highlights. In order to get a really nice circle, I used the bottom of one of my paint brushes and I used my thinnest brush to get a really nice thin line. Here is one of the eye chips all complete. I personally really like it because it is a much bigger eye shape than the original one and it has a lot more dimension in terms of color and shadows. After repainting both eyes, I used some nail polish top coat in order to give them a good shine. Some of you may have noticed in my past repaint videos, but another hobby of mine is repainting my nails. I didn't really want to use my Liquitex high gloss varnish to gloss this eye because when you use something like that to repaint a big surface, it doesn't really give you the bright shine that you want, so I was really curious to use this top coat on the eye. And I will say that it worked really well. I didn't really have too many options for her shoes, so I decided to keep them simple and used her original pair of shoes, and all I did was paint them with some black acrylic paint, and I glossed them using my Liquitex high gloss varnish. They are pretty simple compared to other shoes I have repainted, but since she is a somewhat realistic panda bear, I'm okay with them. I really wanted to give her a springtime dress, but this dress looked really weird on her. It just didn't fit the whole concept, so I decided to scrap it and I made a new dress for her. This is a very easy dress to make. It is just a few layers of lace glued together and it works really well for this doll. I think it adds a little bit of a spring and girly look to her without covering up the whole idea that she is a panda bear. I will quickly add that I made this doll before my last doll, so that is why her outfit is pretty simple, but I did read in the comments that you guys do enjoy seeing the process behind outfits, so I will try to make those process tutorials a little bit more detailed in the future. Another trial and error thing that I did was I had this wig cap that I made earlier for this panda bear doll, and I covered it in some white yarn wefts with some black yarn wefts, and it just didn't look proper to me at all. I also tried making her some black pom-pom ears, and when I cut them directly in half, they just completely fell apart. I ended up just scrapping the whole idea on giving her a wig cap or hair, but I did want to give her some little pom-pom ears. For this, I cut about 1/4 off of a regular white pom-pom, and I did this in order to have a flat surface when I glued this onto her head. And since panda bears have black around their ears, I simply used a mix of black acrylic paint and water to kind of stain the fur around her ear. I did leave a small gap of white because panda bears do have white around their ears too, and this was kind of a tedious process, but it was the best idea I came up with, so that is what I ended up going with here. Again, this doll was all bits around a learning process. After I repainted both ears, I did semi-dry them with a napkin, and after I did this, they turned more of a gray color, so I did go over them with a second layer of black paint. The ears were pretty much the last thing I had left to make for this doll, and after adding them, I felt like her eyes were a little bit incomplete, so last minute I did decide to give her some fake eyelashes, and then I moved on to taking some final photos of her. I do really like this doll. I don't think she is one of my favorites because I did have to sacrifice quality over idea, I guess. That being said, I do still think she is a really nice doll, but I do think that I underestimated how difficult it would be to get my idea across. I will say that I haven't given up on the whole Pinkie Cooper doll experience, so I probably will be customizing another one in the future. This is the end of the video, you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching and joining me on another repainting video. If you liked this video, leave a like, and if you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe and join me in future customs. If you have any questions or comments for me, don't forget to leave them in the comment section below and let me know what you guys thought of this doll as well. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another doll customizing video.